Right, well, that was Nick Bowles. I'd like to welcome constitutional expert Vernon Bogdanor. He's here in the studio, and the Labour MP and Remainer Stephen Kinnock joins us from Central Lobby. Welcome to both of you. Just before I come to Vernon Bogdanor, Stephen, are you part of this coup?
I'm part of the cross-party Norway Plus group. We meet on a regular basis. We talk about all sorts of options and how we can ensure that there's not a no-deal scenario. This plan that's come forward, I think, has real merits. It was unfortunately leaked to the Daily Mail before it was possible to consult with the chairs of the various select committees. But the fact is that we are watching a government falling to pieces. It is our moral duty as parliamentarians to step up. And it's not a coup when you've got democratically elected members of parliament who reflect the views of the people that we were elected to represent, coming forward in order to ensure that we don't crash out of the European Union without a deal. That doesn't sound like a coup to me.
What does it sound like to you, Vernon?
Well, I think there's a fundamental conflict between the interpretation of the referendum, in which the sovereign people made a decision that Parliament doesn't like. The majority of MPs are Remainers, and of course Stephen Kinnock is a Remainer. Now, the government takes the view that this was an instruction which we've got to carry out. We may not like it, but we've got to do it. Some MPs take the view, well, wait a moment, perhaps people didn't quite know what they were voting for, perhaps they don't like the deal, perhaps they should have another go and look at it again. So you've got that conflict, and some MPs are taking the view, this isn't an instruction, we should look at it again and alter the standing orders of Parliament so that government legislation no longer has precedence and backbench legislation can take over.
If that happens, what happens to our representative democracy where the executive usually sets the timetable for legislation?
Well, I can't understand how Parliament could work on that basis, because 650 MPs can't negotiate a deal with the European Union and they can't arrange legislation. It's no good just to pass a motion, for example, saying we want a referendum. There has to be legislation providing for it. Now, how can 650 MPs from the backbenches, as it were, get together the whips and arrangements to get that legislation through?
Stephen?
Well, I keep getting described as a Remainer. Actually, I've absolutely accepted the result, and the Norway Plus plan, which we have here and which I'm shamelessly plugging, actually sets out a very clear plan for leaving the EU and respecting the narrow leave vote. The Common Market 2.0 that we're proposing, in essence, says we're out of the political project, but we stay in the economic market. And that, I think, reflects the mandate. It is a mandate to move house but stay in the same neighbourhood.
Right, but
it
Stephen,
avoids a deeply divisive referendum.
You haven't answered the question that was posed by Vernon Bogdanor. How would it work in practice? You would have MPs themselves, not the government, actually setting legislation and setting a timetable and trying to find what would actually garner the most support in Parliament.
That's right. The proposal is that the liaison committee should come up with a settled proposal that they themselves vote on, that takes the majority of the chairs of the select committees, which then comes back to a vote of all MPs in the House. I believe that that should be the Common Market 2.0 option, but of course it will be up to the liaison committee to decide what to put forward.
OK, well, I mean, the government hasn't found a way through. It doesn't seem to have enough support for its deal. Why shouldn't MPs try this?
Well, and we're being told that the 650-odd MPs won't be able to give a majority to any of the deals which are on the table at the moment. Just look at the liaison committee when they question the Prime Minister. This is hardly an effective forensic body that arrives at one view. It's 36 individuals who all ride their own hobby horses. So I'm afraid this is delay, but it's not a solution. George?
Well, to Vernon's point about mechanism, of course you can't have the executive run by Parliament. But I think what the Speaker and what I think Stephen Kinnock and others are trying to achieve here, and I'm supportive of it, is to give Parliament an opportunity, if the vote goes down, to express a will in an indicative vote, that's all it is, of where there might be a cross-party basis. That, I think, is helpful. Now, the government may choose to ignore it. They probably will. But I think it's helpful that Parliament does everything to try and signal where there might be a majority.
Well, I apologise for describing Stephen Kinnock as a Remainer, but my point, I think, remains that the chairs of the liaison committees can't negotiate with the European Union. They can ask the government to negotiate with the European Union, but the government doesn't believe in the Norway option because that would entail maintaining freedom of movement. So how can the government accept an instruction from Parliament to negotiate on something which it doesn't believe in?
Stephen?
Well, Articles 112 and 113 of the EEA agreement provide for safeguard measures. Any EEA country can unilaterally suspend any one of the 4 freedoms. So the problem that we have is that we haven't had an opportunity for Parliament to really discuss these options in detail, because the Prime Minister has unfortunately behaved in such a high-handed way and has refused to reach out. The government has failed to deliver, and it's our job in a representative parliamentary democracy to step up and find a way through this. We cannot have a no-deal scenario. That would be catastrophic for our economy, and a referendum would be deeply divisive politically. We need a strong compromise, and this is the one that's on the table.
What's wrong with that, then?
Well, Article 112 of the EEA agreement does allow suspension of freedom of movement, but only in emergency situations. It can't be used as an instrument of policy, and we would not be allowed, unlike the other EEA countries, to escape from the provision for freedom of movement if we accepted the Norway solution, which is why the government rejects it. They say the British people, in voting for Brexit, was voting to restrict freedom of movement. That is the government's interpretation.
So my constituency voted to leave, 58%, and immigration was probably the #1 issue, which is why I'm not a Ramona. I'm committed to seeing this through. I think the better argument on immigration actually is this. Firstly, in EFTA, it's free movement of workers, not citizens. Secondly, it would require, I accept, strong package of domestic reforms. Firstly, to limit welfare eligibility, which I think would be roared on with approval in this country. And thirdly, a big package of skills and training for our blue-collar workers who feel threatened by globalisation. That, I think, is a package of reforms that could get through with cross-party support and get us back to work, governing for the whole nation.
This narrative we've got around Brexit is if stopping free movement and immigration is somehow this great victory. Citizens from EU countries make up 5% of the UK population, but they make up 10% of our doctors. They contribute more in tax per head than Brits. And as for our ability to control it, the EU's literal laws say that in order to come here for more than 3 months, you need to either be working or have enough money to not be a burden and have your own medical insurance. So this lie that they come here and drain our economy, no, they're backing up our NHS, they're contributing more in tax. The idea that the one victory we can claim to is that we're stopping free movement when it's actually cutting off our ability to work across Europe is simply mad.
I think the problem is Theresa May's red line is freedom of movement. So she is not going to go for the Norway option while she is Prime Minister, because that would mean going back on that. The whole thing she has defined her Brexit plan on, which means while Theresa May is Prime Minister and the rules as they are, I do think it is just a non-starter.
Just finally, Bernard.
Well, I personally agree with you about freedom of movement. I was a Remainer, but I lost the vote in the referendum. I'm sorry about that, but that is what happened.
All right, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much.